Hi, everybody. Hi. How you doing tonight? You ready for a good urban read tonight? Yeah, here in this very urban setting, this very urban venue, right by the light rail line in between the apartment towers, right? That's what we need, right? I'm Bill Fulton. I'm the director of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice. I'm thrilled to welcome you here to Matchbox 4 for tonight's Urban Reads. Urban Reads is a series that showcases recently published books by local and national urban experts. So please live tweet tonight's event at #KIUrbanReads and follow us at Rice Kinder Inst, INST. What the format will be is that our speaker will speak, then this will roll up and he and I will have a little conversation, and you all have note cards, or should, that when you came in, we should have given you note cards. If you have a question, write it down on the note card, and then when I call attention to our staff, just hold up the note card in your hand. This will be when we're sitting down later on. And then afterwards, of course, there will be a book signing for The Next American City, the big promise of our mid-sized metros, from our speaker. Let me introduce our speaker. Let me first of all say the Kinder Institute thanks our friends of Kinder Institute and our Kinder Corporate Council for supporting all of our work. Let me introduce our speaker, my good friend Mick Cornett. Mick and I have worked together in various things for many years now, but I'm really thrilled to invite him back to Houston. He's been here before. Mick Cornett served 4 terms as Oklahoma City's longest-serving mayor, from 2004 to 2018. Imagine being a mayor for 14 years. Boy, that would age you, I would think. Newsweek named Mick one of the 5 most innovative mayors in the country. And don't tell me how this happened. Fortune magazine listed him as number 25 on their world's greatest leaders list. So that's pretty impressive. Mick is well known for helping Oklahoma City attract an NBA franchise, also putting Oklahoma City on a diet to lose a collective 1 million pounds. But more, just as relevant to this conversation, he also led an innovative $800 million civic infrastructure investment in parks, urban transit, wellness centers, and downtown amenities that has helped elevate Oklahoma City into a desirable place to live and work and an attractive place. So we have a lot to learn from Mick tonight. He's going to talk a little bit about his book, as I said, The Next American City, the big promise of our mid-sized metros, but he's also going to talk about how that applies to Houston and other American cities. So Mick Cornett.
Thank you, Bill. It is great to be back in Houston. I am never nervous speaking before a crowd. I spent 20 years in television and then 20 years nearly in public service, and I'm used to talking to people, but I'm always nervous that anyone will actually show up. So the fact that you are here tonight has relieved all anxiety I have, and now we'll just have the fun opportunity to write a book and to talk about it. Like, I guess, everyone in the country, I have friends that live in Houston. Now, I noticed that most of them didn't come tonight. But I know Andrea French is here. Andrea, wave your hand. And the reason that this is special is she worked with me at City Hall a few years back, and today is her birthday. Yeah, and so she couldn't think of anything better to do on her birthday than to come here and talk about cities. So it means a lot that you came out tonight. Thank you very much for that. Let's remember the book for these reasons. There is a tremendous amount of demographic shifts going on in America, and there's no shortage of people studying all these demographic shifts. People are moving south and they're moving west, which is one of the reasons Houston is doing so well. People are moving to bigger places, urbanization. So if you live in a town of 1,000, there's a chance you might move to a city of 10,000 or 20,000. But you're moving to a place generally where more people live. And of course, Houston is benefiting from that. The demographic shift that I talk about, though, in The Next American City is largely one that benefits the mid-sized metro, which is a city, say, think of Oklahoma City or Tulsa or Little Rock or Omaha, Wichita. Albuquerque, cities that are slightly below those major American city brands, because it appears that the millennial generation and those coming in just behind them have a brand new set of priorities for what they're looking for when they choose a place to reside. And they are placing a much higher priority on quality of life than seemingly other generations before them have. And it's also interesting what they perceive as delivering a higher quality of life. It is things like the ability to afford a home. It is the cost of living, the price of buying a house. You know, if you're living on the east or west coast and you're a young person of a middle-class background, there's a really good chance you don't picture yourself owning a home at all, just because it seems like such a large investment. Well, in smaller cities, like the mid-sized metros that I mentioned, people graduate from college and almost immediately buy a home in some cases. That generation also seems less inclined to want to sit in traffic. They really don't even want to sit in a car, but they really don't want to sit in traffic. And in most of the mid-sized metros that are out there, traffic congestion is minimal if it exists at all. And a final consideration that I'll point out, and this is not true in every city of this size, but there's a prioritization placed on fresh water and clean air. And some cities have taken care of that and done a really good job, and some cities haven't, but those that have are likely to benefit in some way or another. And I worked with a young man through the years named Jason White, and I met him through some city work that he had done at Harvard, and he was the one that kind of brought this mid-sized metro trend to my attention, because he heard me talk about it, but he said, you realize Oklahoma City is the best example in the United States of what you're talking about. And I think if that's the case, it's because no city in America has come as far as fast as Oklahoma City. Now that's partially because it had so far to go. You go back to the Oklahoma City of the early 1990s, and probably the worst economy in the United States. You'll obviously, if you're my age or older, remember the oil and gas issues in the 1980s. Well, Oklahoma and Oklahoma City was very much suffered because of that. But Oklahoma City had also not paid much attention to what I call the things that separate in the quality of life. In other words, Oklahoma City was very value conscious. If it was a public project, if it was a civil engineering work, Oklahoma City probably did it as cheaply as they could. There was not much attention paid to design. And, you know, you can understand the argument. It's a conservative place, and, you know, these are tax dollars. Why would you spend a penny more than you had to spend? But the result was you do that through the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, and you have Oklahoma City in 1990. And what I've come to observe as Oklahoma City has rebuilt itself is that you are not going to have businesses with high standards in a city with low standards. And Oklahoma City had become a city with low standards. And through some dynamic leadership from a mayor that took office in 1987 and served 11 years, Oklahoma City started to turn it around. And I've advised people before, if they want to be a successful mayor, make sure they had really good predecessors. And I can assure you that's the key to my success. Let's take a look at some slides here. And I never know where to point the slides, because obviously you pointed at a screen. Am I doing it right? I was doing it wrong. All right. So we know that this urbanization is taking place, and we know that people are moving to cities of bigger places. By 2050, 70% of the human family is going to live in a city, and 60% of those urban areas have not been built. So how we build those cities is a critical question for urban leaders today. Keep in mind, none of us live in cities that we built. We all live in cities that we inherited from previous generations. But here you can see that cities are going to be changing and building new places to live, new places to work, new places to play. And because of that, we have opportunities to purposely build places that are memorable. Urbanization, I would maintain, is the greatest force shaping our future. And there are 4 key principles to ensure that growing cities provide great expectations, create opportunities, and drive innovation. And I'm going to mention these 4 principles and then draw in an Oklahoma City experience to kind of highlight it. These are economic strength and diversity, which is building wealth, building jobs, creating opportunities. Civic pride and social cohesion, basically creating places that people want to call home. Creating a culture of wellness. I think that's one that a lot of times gets set aside, but nobody wants to live in a city that doesn't pay attention to wellness and provides healthy opportunities. And then, of course, strong, sustainable cities. People in that millennial generation, those highly educated 20-somethings, are much more likely to be attuned to other forms of transportation behind cars. They want walkable spaces. We'll talk about economic strength and diversity, and I'll bring down a story from Oklahoma City's history that I call the best thing that never happened. In 1987, the citizens of Oklahoma City voted in a business-minded mayor named Ron Norick. And Ron Norick came to office in the weakest of economic times, and he pledged that he was going to help create jobs. Well, of course, there was no argument there. That's what the city needed. And as good fortune would happen, United Airlines was looking for a place in the country that it could create a maintenance facility to take care of its ever-growing 737 fleet. And this was going to be sort of the granddaddy of all economic development ventures. This was 5,000 to 10,000 jobs, but an annual economic impact to the community that could land this opportunity of $1 billion. And this is 1990 dollars. This is really big. And of course, Oklahoma City decided this is the one we want. We haven't had any good economic news in a long, long time, so let's try and put together some incentives and see if we can get United's attention. Well, the mayor went so far as to pass a sales tax contingent on United selecting Oklahoma City. And he called United and said, how about this? We pass a penny on the dollar sales tax. We're going to bring in about $140 million through that tax, and we'll build the facility for you. All you have to do is bring the jobs and operate the business. And United said, well, that sounds great, Mayor, but your citizens aren't going to pass that type of an election. Well, United didn't have any understanding of the desperation of Oklahoma City. It passed 62% countywide. The state realized, well, that may not be enough. So the governor called a special session of the legislature, and they put some more incentives on the table. And now it's like $160 million in 1990 money. And so you can imagine with the dollars just continuing to pile up, Oklahoma City's looking better and better to United Airlines. And so as the cuts start being made, Oklahoma City was probably 150th on the list when it started. It's down to just a handful at the end. And the cities are invited into Chicago for a final round to talk incentives and to meet with the board and meet with the CEO and whatever last minute items need to be addressed. And most economic development deals are kind of behind the scenes, low profile. I mean, a lot of them take place in Houston today, and I'm guessing that many of you never even know they're going on. That's just kind of the nature of economic development deals. But because of the sales tax election, this one was as high as profile as you can imagine. It was leading the 10 o'clock news. It was on the front page of the papers. And there hadn't been any good news in Oklahoma City in so long that almost everybody seemingly was on the edge of their seat as United's CEO took the microphone and started to announce United's decision, because everyone in Oklahoma City kind of felt like this was going to be the good news they've been waiting for. And the CEO said that we're going to build this facility in Indianapolis. And it was about that quiet in Oklahoma City. Now, Mayor Norick, to his credit, did 2 proactive things. The first thing he did was he insisted United tell us where we went wrong, because he did not understand it. He thought the incentive package that Oklahoma City had created was very generous, and he didn't understand why Oklahoma City hadn't been selected. And United didn't really want to talk about it. I mean, there's no reason to create ill will now. In fact, they said, Mayor Norick, you were the most courteous, the most polite, you were the most responsive. You all didn't do anything wrong. You just finished second. And the mayor insisted that we have to learn from this experience. What can you tell us? Where did we go wrong? Well, as it turned out, Unbeknownst to the people of Oklahoma City, United had sent in some mid-level executives and their spouses and had them spend a weekend in downtown Oklahoma City. And they reported back to the board of directors. And the board came to the conclusion that they couldn't choose Oklahoma City because they couldn't imagine their employees living there. Oklahoma City could no longer buy the allegiance of corporate America at any cost, seemingly. Well, that was sort of the kick in the teeth that the mayor needed to hear. Then he did a second proactive thing. He went to Indianapolis. Now, he did not move there, although at this phase of his political career, I can assure you it probably crossed his mind. But when he got to Indianapolis, he got in a rental car and he said he drove downtown and he saw a downtown with all of this life and vitality. He saw tall buildings and restaurants and retail and water features and pro sports venues and sports teams. And contrast that to downtown Oklahoma City, which was completely void of any activity after 5 o'clock. There were still some jobs in the tall buildings, but at 5 o'clock, people went back to the suburbs where they belonged. Oklahoma City had virtually no retail. I think we had one hotel at that point in downtown, and it was struggling. And if you lived downtown in that era, you were probably in jail. And so Mayor Norrick came back and he realized, look, the citizens passed that sales tax, and we were going to give that money away. Maybe they would pass a sales tax if we invested it on us. Well, you would think that would be a much easier sell, but it wasn't. They ran the election and maps barely passed. Metropolitan area projects, 9 things placed on the ballot. The citizens could vote yes or no. They either got all 9 or they got nothing. It was a 5-year penny on the dollar sales tax. It passed 53%, yet today you cannot find anyone who will admit that they voted against it. Because ultimately it changed everything about Oklahoma City. It not only changed the physical look of the city, but it changed emotionally. Because for the first time, really, people in Oklahoma City had something to be proud of. People could actually invite someone from another part of the country to come see something in Oklahoma City. We always thought Oklahoma City was a good place to live and a good place to raise a family, but we were very aware that it was not a great place to vacation. And our tourism budget reflected that. And so MAPS, that $300 and some odd million investment from the 1990s, has been followed by $7 billion of private sector investment. The downtown urban core is more vitality than anyone could possibly imagine. We went from 1 downtown hotel 20 years ago to 20 downtown hotels today, and they seemingly cannot build them fast enough. Thousands and thousands of people live in downtown Oklahoma City. The mayor built a new sports arena where the NBA team plays. There's a new library, built up the Performing Arts Center, some improvements at the fairgrounds and the convention center. The mayor even had the audacity to believe that we could put water in the river. Now, I know here in Houston, you live in a city whose river came complete with water. In Oklahoma City, our river was just a big ditch. It didn't have any water at all, really, unless it had rained recently. And the idea with MAPS was that we would build some low water dams and impound water. And, even if there were no development ever created, at least we'd have water in the river. And we had very low expectations in Oklahoma City at this time frame. Just having water in the river seemed like the most marvelous thing. And today, because of private sector and philanthropic investment, we have the finest venue in the world for the sports of canoe, kayak, and rowing on that river. We have hosted the Olympic trials for kayak the last 2 Olympics. All in a river that 20 years ago, the city had a line item in its budget to mow the river twice a year. Yeah. Let's move on. Civic pride and social cohesion. I became the mayor in 2004, and because of Mayor Norrick's work and his subsequent successor, Mayor Kirk Humphreys, they did some incredible investing and laying the groundwork for the era which I had the good fortune of presiding over. And as I became the mayor of Oklahoma City, I was trying to go around the country and talk about what an emerging economic force that I believed we were. But as I traveled around the country in this 2004, 2005 time period, I could see that the moment I mentioned Oklahoma City, people had one reaction. They remembered the bombing that took place in 1995. And it didn't seem to matter what I said, I couldn't get them off their fixation with those horrible images that emerged from the Murrah building and the bombing and the murder of 168 people in Oklahoma City in that era. Keep in mind, this was less than 10 years since the event had happened. And as much as we had done to properly memorialize the event, I also knew we can't build an economy on sympathy. We've got to improve our brand. We can't be branded by a tragedy. We can't allow our brand to be branded by things that we have so little control over. And so I started traveling to New York to start visiting with the commissioners of the NBA and the NHL about what I perceived as the wisdom of putting an NBA team or an NHL team in Oklahoma City. And I was not getting very far with that idea. Commissioner Stern called me the mayor who won't go away. But on my third trip into their offices to try and tell them about this, Commissioner Stern set me down and tried to help me figure out where Oklahoma City could fit in the major league sporting world. He said, I do not have a team for you. But at the end of some exhaustive conversations that we had, he said, I'll try and help you get a hockey team because I really appreciate what you're trying to do and I think you're doing this for all the right reasons. And he loved my passion for professional sports. Well, that's kind of where it was 4 months later when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And while all cities in this part of the country were dealing with trying to help the city of New Orleans and the people of New Orleans try to figure out how life could go on immediately and business could be conducted, I also noticed that they had an NBA team and their arena had been damaged by the hurricane and the water that came in and didn't go back out. And so I called Commissioner Stern, and he called me back about 3 hours later, and he said, I didn't call you right back because I knew what you wanted. And I told him we had an NBA-ready arena, no tenant. And he had said before that what he was impressed about Oklahoma City was how prepared we were. Because in one of our conversations, I was telling him about this great arena we had, and he said, how much debt do you have on that arena? And I said, none. You see, with the MAPS projects, we pay cash. We collect the sales tax, and then we start spending the money. And when they are open debt-free. There's no bonding out of any of the money. And in a very conservative environment in Oklahoma City, our citizens seem to like the idea that at least in that funding concept, there's no debt with MAPS proposals. And so the NBA is especially interested in debt on arenas because every other team in the league expects the team to come in there and help them pay off their debt. And I said, we're debt-free. We don't need your help. There's no debt. And he looked at me like I'd created plutonium because he had never heard of a city financing an arena with cash and owning it outright. When in fact, we're about to open up a convention center and we paid cash. And so we've taken on some big funding issues, but we have done it with this pay-as-you-go philosophy. And so, long story short, very long story, there's actually been a book written about how we got the NBA team. In 6 weeks, we had sold every ticket for the 2004-2005 season, and we led the league in corporate sponsorships with a 6-week startup before opening tip. Commissioner Stern came in a month later and told us we were at the top of the relocation list. The Hornet franchise stayed not 1 year, but 2 years in Oklahoma City, and then a group of our investors went and bought the franchise in Seattle, couldn't get an arena deal in Seattle, and they were then free to move the Sonics to Oklahoma City, and they're now called the Oklahoma City Thunder. And the point of all of that story in a very concentrated effort was to talk about the social cohesion that a sporting team can give you and the importance of having that connection to the greater outside world. Those highly educated 20-somethings that we've been talking about, that millennial generation, they all want to be part of a bigger conversation. And it is a very superficial level, but it is very real that your city is perceived to be who your sports teams play. And so for over 100 years, Oklahoma City had played Tulsa and Wichita and Albuquerque and Amarillo, and those were our peer cities, fine cities all. And then suddenly, seemingly overnight, we're playing Houston and Chicago and New York and Philadelphia. And the perception of Oklahoma City and that superficial level of equality that comes from having your city on a sports center highlight show on a level basis improved the brand tremendously. And our citizens still love to come up and tell me a story about how they've been traveling in some Eastern Hemisphere country, and the bellman knows the city because they follow the NBA and they follow the Thunder. And they're very aware that seemingly no one in that part of the world had ever heard of Oklahoma City prior to us getting an NBA basketball team. And it means different things to different cities, and if you have multiple teams, each one means less. But to go from being a minor league city to being a major league city is a tremendous step upward. And in this ability to attract highly educated 20-somethings, it's critical to become culturally and socially relevant to the greater picture of what's going on in the world. You can do it through the arts, you can do it through sports, you can do it a lot of ways. Sports is what has helped us get there. We've also started working on creating a culture of health and wellness. About the time I became mayor, I started noticing we were showing up on what I call the lists. Best city to do this, best city to do that, best place to start a business. Now, we weren't at the top of any of these lists at the time. We'd be like number 21 on best place to start a new business. And we'd never really been on a list before. So, that was cool to be on a list. And then came out the list of the most obese cities in the country. And there we were on that list. And I remember trying to figure out, what do I do? What do I say? Because the media was sticking microphones in front of me and asking me to respond to it. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have a solution. And then I got on the scales, and I realized that I'd gained 20 pounds in the first 2 years I'd been in office. And I went on this government website, and I typed in my height, and I typed in my weight, and it said, obese. I thought, what a stupid website. I'm not obese. I would know if I was obese. And then I started getting honest about my kind of lifelong battle with obesity and realized I needed to lose weight. I'd become an example of Oklahoma City's problem. So I lost about 1 pound a week. All I did was just stop eating as much. It really wasn't very complicated. Stopped eating as much, and I lost about 1 pound a week for 40 weeks. But while I was doing it, I started studying Oklahoma City, and I was trying to figure out why is it that we have an obesity problem. And I realized that we had created an incredible quality of life if you happened to be a car. If you were a car, there was no better place in the world to live than Oklahoma City. It's seemingly everything we had done for 100 years revolved around the automobile. The way we had built the city, the way we designed our buildings, everything was about the automobile drop-off. We had unofficially instructed our civil engineers that their main job was to see how fast they could get a car from here to here. And they were really good at it. Traffic just flows through Oklahoma City. And with 3 interstate highways converging in Oklahoma City and the loops that come with that, we had all this traffic capacity to stare. You can literally get a speeding ticket during rush hour in Oklahoma City. Traffic flies. But I also realized there was a social and a health cost to this suppression of common sense, in that, because 20 miles meant 20 minutes, people kept living further and further away from the urban core, and urban sprawl had its heyday in Oklahoma City. And I also realized that although we had fixed it by then, we had gone a couple of decades without requiring developers to build sidewalks, and many had not. And so we literally had probably a couple of 100,000 homes that lived in neighborhoods where there was no walkability at all. And we had built libraries, and we'd built schools, and we built neighborhoods, but we hadn't really connected any of it. We had a jogging and biking trail master plan, which was great, except we never funded it. And I can remember being on city council in years before I was mayor, and they gave us this explanation of the bicycle trail master plan and showed it to the council. And I said, hey, at the rate we're going, when are we going to finish that bicycle trail master plan? And there was this kind of low level of laughter because I seemed to be the only one in the room that knew it was never going to be funded in our lifetime at the rate we were going. And so with a MAPS proposal we put forward, ultimately, we funded the entire bicycle trail master plan all at once. But I'm learning about these things while I'm examining Oklahoma City and all of the problems that we created. I finally decide that I don't know how to stop obesity, but I do know that the first step must be to start a conversation about it. Because obesity had become the topic that we didn't really want to talk about in Oklahoma City. It was like, we're nice people, and obesity affects the way people look, and we don't want to talk negatively about the way people look. And so our unannounced strategy to dealing with obesity was to ignore it. And I knew better. And so I came up with an idea to get a conversation going. I went to the zoo, and I stood in front of the elephants, and I put the entire city on a diet and announced we were going to lose 1 million pounds. And that's when all hell broke loose. But ultimately, over 4 years, 47,000 people signed up on our website pledging to lose weight, and the counter took their names and email addresses and logged their successes as they would go back to the website and tell us about how much weight they'd lost. And we finally lost 1 million pounds in 4 years and 3 weeks. And I can't really quantify that we lost 1 million pounds because I don't know that there weren't 47,000 other people who didn't gain 1 million pounds. But it was an awareness campaign, and I can tell you that it did penetrate the community. It seemed like once we were free to talk about obesity, and I was, in front of every microphone and crowd I could get talking about my lifelong struggles, suddenly it just seemed you had families talking about it amongst themselves for the very first time. You had business owners talking about it with their employees for the first time. It's as if the veil had been lifted. Church pastors were talking about it at the pulpit and creating support groups because losing weight's hard. And it's always easier to do something that's hard if you feel like people are there supporting you. Well, in this case, the entire city was a support group. And if you were losing weight, everybody was seemingly pulling for you. And it has changed the concept of what a community can do and what should be its priority. We took something that wasn't even being discussed and made it something we've become proud of. When it became time to pass MAPS 3, because of the awareness campaign, we were then able to go back and start rebuilding the built environment. And so we have now rebuilt all of our downtown grid to be more pedestrian friendly. We narrowed all the streets. We have on-street parking, fully landscaped downtown. We took out all of the one-way streets and made them two-way. We put in bicycle paths. With the original MAPS proposal, we created things to do downtown, but we hadn't changed the infrastructure toward the pedestrian once the pedestrian arrived. It was still very car-centric. It was hard to cross the street. The pedestrian did not feel welcome in downtown Oklahoma City. And all of that changed, and we were able to fund it because of the awareness campaign that drew attention to the fact that a city's built environment has a lot to do with the health of its citizens. So we built senior health and wellness centers throughout the community, hundreds of miles of sidewalks, completed the jogging and biking path, and much, much more through MAPS 3 and a series of other initiatives. And in 2012, I was doing some media in New York, and I remembered I went into the office of Men's Fitness magazine and recalling to myself that was the magazine that had placed us on the list of the most obese cities in the country, and picked up the most recent edition at the time I was there, and we had gone from being on their fattest list to being on their fittest list. We were number 22 on the fittest city in the country. And it just feels in Oklahoma City that health is now a priority. It's something we're proud of and something we're working on. And you better believe those highly educated 20-somethings notice things like that. They don't want to live in a city that doesn't value health and wellness and fitness. Environmental sustainability has a lot to do with building a healthier environment. And once the awareness campaign had taken hold, things like creating our downtown streetcar system, which just opened up a couple of months ago, the bike share program. The picture there in the upper middle is our Bricktown Canal. That's an idea we stole from San Antonio and created an entertainment district, and we now have 7 million visitors a year that are going into that entertainment district. That was an old abandoned warehouse district where it was not safe to go when the sun went down. But today it is adjacent to downtown, and I actually live in that entertainment district. And it's one of the most sought after residences in Oklahoma City. So summing up kind of Oklahoma City's story, one of the worst economies in the country to one of the best, millennials taking notice. We now have in-migration from Texas and California, consistently ranking in the top 10 for jobs and opportunities to build a family, became a big league city through the arrival of the Oklahoma City Thunder, and really have bought into the idea that Oklahoma City was trying to lure outside investors before it ever invested in itself. And I think there's lessons there to be learned for a lot of places, especially smaller rural places, that have now found themselves in opportunity zones and are waiting for outside dollars and outside capital to come in and help them rejuvenate their economy. In many cases, they haven't done the necessary steps to be ready for that investment. And you see that in cities around the country. I think one of Oklahoma City's advantages was what I call the advantage of desperation. Things got so bad that the leaders didn't have to convince people there was a problem. And if you live in a place and things are just okay, it's hard to do something drastic. It's hard to do something bold. It's hard to get 50% of the people to tax themselves because it might be a little better. But in Oklahoma City, because of the desperate state that we have been in different scenarios, it has been seemingly easier to get these tax initiatives passed and to keep people investing in the city. The idea of the book that highly educated 20-somethings are likely to populate these mid-sized metros in greater proportions to the nation's largest cities is not new. Houston will probably be an exception because of the other demographic shifts that are going in. I mentioned people are moving south and people are moving west. People are moving to bigger places. Houston seems to catch all of the breaks when it comes to how to attract population. But for most of the country, you're going to start seeing cities in this mid-sized area gain in population percentage-wise more than you will in New York or in LA or in Chicago because of the shift in new priorities that value the quality of life in a community as opposed to just always imagining that bigger is better. Let me talk a few cities. Anybody been to Des Moines lately? Not a single hand going up until you hear this. Des Moines is really creating an incredible downtown. There's a kind of a story that you see play out in a lot of Midwestern cities, but a lot of cities that just were built upon a river. At one time, Des Moines was a thriving city, and then all the architecture along the river became old, and they kind of forgotten about it, and then they became embarrassed by it. What Des Moines did was they went out and rediscovered it and started investing in it. They also, in the 20th century, were very inventive when it came to food and nutrition. And you can imagine all of the food that is grown in Iowa and in that part of the country. Well, what's cooler today than food? I mean, you cannot hardly turn on the television and start flipping through the channels when you see all of these shows about different chefs and different ways to do food. And Des Moines is capturing a benefit of all of that. It's become a capital of food innovation around the globe. And it is an example of one of many cities. There are dozens of cities in this size population that have recaptured their downtown and have thousands of people moving to the urban core. It may surprise you that the best urban park in the world may have just opened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Through philanthropy, largely, $450 million park has opened up. There's a philanthropist named George Kaiser in Tulsa who really likes Tulsa. And he not only helped the city build a park, but he also helped other philanthropists in Tulsa to make sure that there's an endowment that completely funds the ongoing maintenance of the park from here on into eternity. So if you are a fan of parks and you want to see on the cutting edge what's coming to parks, you owe it to yourself to see the Gathering Place. It opened in September. And I think what also is interesting about the Gathering Place is that it was not built as an economic development catalyst. Now, generally in Oklahoma City, and really we're just 100 miles away, almost every time Oklahoma City comes up with a grand idea or a civic investment, it is to be an economic catalyst for something else. That's just the way we think. It's the way our economy has been modeled through the years. Tulsa is trying to bring people together in sort of a social experiment. They view that their city has been split apart through the years by different, by race and by equity. And the Gathering Place is a social experience, an experiment to bring people together to one place in Tulsa where everybody can feel welcome. And I don't know of a single person in America that isn't pulling for this park to be successful. It will undoubtedly create economic development. But I think it's interesting and worth noting that it was not the primary reason that they set out to create this park. Columbus, Ohio is amongst the fastest growing metros in the United States. Like a lot of cities that are doing well right now, they have a major university in town. They're also a state capital, but they have also really invested heavily in the autonomous vehicle, the tech sector, and education. And although every city claims to be doing these things and every city has a few successes to claim, Columbus, Ohio is doing more than its share. And so in a part of the country where it seems like most cities are hemorrhaging people, Columbus's economy is continuing to grow. And you got to figure that their population base is likely to continue to grow too. They are hoping to become the capital of the autonomous vehicle in the U.S. and the world. A lot of cities are working on that, including this one. So it'll be a tough competition, but I wanted to bring to your attention that they're doing a lot of things right and are investing in tech economy like no city is of its size. Louisville has a bunch of things going right as well. They have a dynamic mayor named Greg Fisher. And Greg Fisher started an initiative a few years ago that when he announced it, I was stunned. I didn't really know what it meant, and I didn't really know what to think about it. He decided that Louisville was going to become a city of compassion. Well, he started with his city staff, and he started bringing in people to talk about compassion and how we exercise compassion. But I think the powerful statement he made to his citizens through the further growth of this message and this initiative was that imagine you're a young person growing up in a city and you know that there's a high expectation of compassion. It's taught in your schools. You talk about it at church. Your parents are talking about it at home. It becomes one of the things that the city is going to take pride in. And we all know that very, very good things are going to happen in a city that practices compassion. Their economy is strong. They have urban issues like everybody else. Louisville's struggling on urban education just like almost every other American city. But I want to draw attention to Mayor Fisher's courage in talking about something that mayors don't generally talk about. And we'll all sit back as you see him there with the Dalai Lama in the bottom center picture. Louisville is urged to be compassionate. And really, what I'm asking people in urban cities, especially these mid-sized metros, to start thinking about is what type of city do we want to create? The expectations are always rising And I don't know if it's social media, or I don't know if it's just the attributes of that generation, but ever since I've been involved in public service, it just seems like the level of transparency cannot be high enough. The level of accountability is ever growing. And I think all of that can lead us to really good things, but what it promotes more than anything else is preparation. We need to be thinking about what type of cities we're going to create and then set out a plan on how we're going to create them. Because only those cities that do those types of things are going to win in this race to attract the highly educated 20-somethings that every city is trying to bring in. And then there's the question that almost every person asks when we start talking about doing new and improved things: how are we going to pay for this stuff? How are we going to finance it? And most people, I would expect, in an audience of this size is familiar with opportunity zones and the opportunity zones that have been created here and not the rest of Texas, not the rest of the country. I think there is going to be a tremendous amount of capital dollars that is ultimately spent on these investments. I do believe, however, that the first round of money that comes in is going to go to very safe investments. They're going to pick off the easy things first. Most capitalists with money to invest are very risk averse. And so the hope that they were going to start taking on risky ventures, I think, was probably short-sighted. But I will say that the cities that have done the things to prepare for the investment are probably going to succeed more than those that haven't. In other words, who's invested in their infrastructure? Who's taken care of the needs of water going forward? Who has fiber where people can get the connectivity that they need? Those are the cities that are going to draw the most money from the opportunity zones and the most investment. 40% of the opportunity zones that have been created around the United States are in rural areas. And I'm hopeful that these rural areas realize this is an opportunity to attract capital for really the first time in a while, but they probably are going to have to invest in their own infrastructure and a lot of the things that big cities have been doing for a while in order to be able to compete with better developments. Keep in mind, the way the opportunity zone regulations have been written, it does not make a bad investment a good investment. It just makes a good investment a better investment. And if people weren't investing in a part of the country before, it's not likely they're going to start investing because there's an opportunity zone, unless it becomes a good investment, and that's probably not going to happen unless that community is investing in itself. And it really comes down to what Mayor Norick learned in Oklahoma City, over 30 years ago. You're not going to have cities with low standards attracting businesses with high standards. And you're not going to be attracting people if you aren't investing in the future and investing in quality of life activities. And really, that's been the story of Oklahoma City. It was when we started investing in ourselves that good things started to happen. The book is The Next American City. And let me bring Bill back up. Bill, where are you? Over there? Bill, come back up. We'll talk a little bit more, and then we'll take your questions too. Thank you all very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mick. That was great. For those of you who have questions, if you could write them down and hold your note card up, and our staff will go around and pick them up. We'll get to your questions as soon as we can. That was really great, Mick. The thing that really struck me, I've heard you speak many times, and the thing that really struck me more about this than ever before, maybe because you're talking about other cities as well, is you really emphasize flipping the narrative. Nothing's more important than the narrative about your city, which is something Houston has struggled with over time, right? As Professor Kleinberg always says, in the old days, Houston was all about money, about jobs. Come on down, it smells, but it's the smell. It's ugly, it smells, but it's the smell of money. You've heard Professor Kleinberg say that. How do you, and you talked about Des Moines, and everybody got a blank stare, right? If you are trying to flip the narrative of a city, how do you do that, and where do you start? What do you start with?
Well, one way is to take inventory of what you got. Sometimes I think, the The worst people to know what their assets are the people that live there, because they've seen it every day and they pass by it and they drive by it and they may not even like it. They probably don't even notice it. But I can tell you, and Bill is a former mayor, as I am now, when we go into a place, we look at cities differently. We look at opportunities to make something into a bigger something. We look at transportation corridors. We look at where transit-oriented development could take place. We're looking, how can you grow that into something larger? What could happen on the second floor of that older building over there? And sometimes it takes someone from the outside to go into these places and start talking optimistically about the great architecture they have, and they don't really know about it. And the other thing, in Oklahoma City, we had a river that we had to mow. And so, we put water in it, and now it's the finest venue in the world for canoe, kayak, and rowing. We have the only lighted rowing course in the world. And there's all sorts of regattas taking place, and rowing teams from all over the world coming in, and people who row and their coaches are all moving to Oklahoma City. What we discovered was that there weren't a lot of cities investing in these sports, like none of them. And so once we figured out that we could, and it was largely oil and gas philanthropists that started it, we found something we could build around. And that's the key. Find out what you've got that's unique and you can build on and become and own. But yeah, you've got to have a story. You've got to be unique, and it helps if if it's a little bit weird. Yeah.
Keep Oklahoma City weird?
Yeah, well, I think that one's been used.
That one's been used. Well, that's a great, keeping Austin weird is a great tagline. And one of the things I always say about Mick is he's the master of the great tagline. I mean, you are who you play, right? What a great line. Another great line I've often heard you say is, you can't be a suburb of nothing.
We tried.
What do you mean by that? And how so one of the challenges we face as an urban institute is, are we really dealing with the whole metropolitan area? Are you only talking about the part of town where people ride around in scooters? Right?
Yeah.
So how do you take that tagline, you can't be a suburb of nothing, and use it in a cohesive way to bring together the really urban and the more suburban parts of a metropolitan area behind a common cause?
Because the point is, in Oklahoma City, like Houston, there's the expansive city limits. And so I've been in, you can imagine in 14 years as mayor, how many neighborhood meetings I've been in 10 or 20 miles from the urban core. And a lot of times I'm pushing an initiative, or I'm a candidate and I'm running for re-election, and there's always one guy in the back that I can tell isn't buying anything I'm saying. And when I've lost the intellectual argument, when I know that I've not penetrated his armor, I close with this. I say, well, all I can tell you is we're creating a city where your kid and your grandkid are going to choose to live. Oh, they hate that argument because they know it's true. Because the quality of life in the suburbs is directly related to the intensity of the core. And if your core is dead, like Oklahoma City's was, then the quality of life in the suburbs suffers from that. And, people want to complain about downtown and complain that too much money is spent in this one confined area. But I'll tell you how you can tell if you have buy-in on your downtown. Go off into the suburbs, and certainly you have more than just about anybody else, and ask somebody to point to downtown. And if they're pointing to downtown Katy, you're in trouble. If they're pointing to where the big buildings are, then you've won. You've won the idea that in the region you have to have a core, and that core has to be protected. And it's very precious that your urban core be a central part of the theme and the emotions of the community. Oklahoma City is an example of what can happen when you just pretend it doesn't matter. And United Airlines let us know it mattered.
The United story is a story of a tax incentive deal that fell apart and kind of blew up in your face. Mm-hmm. we recently had a tax incentive. You recently saw a tax incentive deal that blew up in a different way, which was Amazon in New York. I'm just curious, a couple things. What are your thoughts about the Amazon experience, the blowback in New York City, and is there a way for cities and city governments to make tax incentive deals actually work? What does that look like?
Well, yeah, so I think there are some similarities to Oklahoma City's experience with United and Amazon courting itself around the country. First of all, that the type of campus that Amazon was wanting to create was going to be very much a transit-oriented development. They did not want to build a campus for 50,000 cars. I mean, you heard that over and over, you saw it in the proposal. Well, you know, most American cities, certainly those west of the Mississippi, have kind of built our cities around the car and the automobile. And we don't have the density in most cases to create the type of public transit that we want and that Amazon was expecting. What I hope is that the communities that ultimately failed to win the Amazon offering will use that as a starting point for what they need to do to create a better city. And if you create a city where, you know, highly educated people want to live, you're going to have all the opportunities you need. And I talked very little about education, but education is the number one investment that a government and a city and a community needs to make. I guess the reason I don't concentrate on it much is that the cities don't have a whole lot of opportunities to directly fund education. We've done about everything we can to try and embrace inner city education, but because it's funded in a different method and cities don't have the oversight over education the way they do in a lot of eastern cities. But you know, having opportunities to educate people and to have the right amount of community colleges and four-year colleges and the commitment to education. If you are known as a community that values education, your economy is going to be just fine.
So you were on Houston Matters the other day, I think it was Friday, and you said, according to somebody in the audience, you said that some mid-sized cities such as Austin have faced big challenges regarding their transportation infrastructure. Austin has certainly outgrown its freeway capacity, at least in the core. If you were mayor of such a city like Austin, for example, how would you begin to get things on track on an issue, on the transportation issue? Well,
I mean, Austin is a case study for every mid-sized metro out there. My first job out of college, I was a television sportscaster, I was the main sports anchor in Bryan, Texas, just a little bit down the road here. And so I remember vividly what Austin was like in 1980. And I think TV market, it was like number 103 or something like that. And through, you know, some creating a quality of life and attracting the right educated and industrial entrepreneurs, you know, they started growing. And I think it's an opportunity for every other city to look at what did Austin do right, and then ultimately, you know, where did Austin fail to plan properly for its future? And it's fairly obvious that they didn't create the transportation network that the city ultimately needed. And I will say this, you know, change is hard, and change leadership is hard. I describe the world as really consisting of three types of people. One, there's a group of people who will tell you they do not like change, and if you change something, they're going to be mad. And then you change something, and you find out they were right. They're furious. There's another group, and this is a perplexing group. There's a group of people that would say, we love change. And so you change something, and you find out they were wrong. They're mad too. Now there's a third group of people that will say they like change, and they really do like change. But that group is extinct. That group is not around anywhere in the world that I have witnessed. Now, I'm exaggerating there to prove a point that it's hard to change something. I can't tell you how many times as mayor of Oklahoma City, I was working on something and I thought, man, everybody's going to love this. I was wrong every time. Somebody didn't like it. You know, you'd put like a bicycle trail around a neighborhood, and people would complain. We don't want strangers coming in our neighborhood. We don't want people peering over our back fence. Like people are going to get off their bicycle and peer into their house over the back fence. But, you know, you think something is going to be just so highly, overwhelmingly loved. And if you change something, you've upset somebody. And so this is just kind of a cautionary advice for people. If you have leadership in your community that's willing to try and change something, do what you can to support them, because it is hard. It is hard, and no city has changed more than Oklahoma City. So I have some successes and some failures, and I watched my predecessors do a lot of the same sort of thing. And positive energy is helpful. Getting leadership aligned, getting more people to pull on the same rope. Because of Oklahoma City's kind of marriage of the business community and the elected officials, I get called a lot in to speak in cities where people don't get along. You know, like there's a lot of finger pointing. I mean, the school board doesn't get along with the city, and the city doesn't get along with the business people, and the business community doesn't get along with anybody, and they can't figure out why their kids are going to college and never coming back. And so that, you know, they kind of want to know, you know, what's the secret sauce, or what can you do? And you know, I don't know that there is, but I can tell you that in a community where the leadership doesn't get along, the citizens resent having to be the referees. And they will prove their resentment by just going and voting no. Doesn't matter what you're asking them to vote on, they're just going to vote no, because they don't know who to believe. And a community has got to figure out a way to embrace its champions, to look for change, accept change, and elect leaders who are willing to take chances and risk and create good things to happen. And it's real easy to be against change, because generally most people are. But communities that don't change are going to fall behind, because there's somebody out there, some city out there that's really, really desperate, like Oklahoma City. And it's much easier to change when things are really, really bad. But when things are good, it's harder to change.
Do you think that the large cities like Houston, which have sort of taken population and economic growth for granted, have a fight on their hands now with the mid-sized cities?
It's hard to imagine Houston not continuing its success just because of the momentum, the businesses that are here. Businesses aren't relocating. You know, there's always this belief that big companies move around a lot. They really don't move around a lot. Now, what is happening, though, is that companies' lifespans are probably shorter. Business cycles are probably shorter. And so you've got to start investing in your entrepreneurs. You've got to keep investing in education. That those 20-somethings are very entrepreneurial. And if you can just attract them, your economy is probably going to be fine. If you find out that young people, especially highly educated young people, don't want to live in your city anymore, then you better start worrying about your future. But as long as you're able to attract highly educated young people, your economy is probably going to be fine.
What kind of homeless issues does Oklahoma City have, and how are they being addressed?
I think it's reflective of most of America. It's more than it used to be. We feel like we are a city of great compassion. I think being on 3 interstate highways also brings in people who might be transient, looking for something and wind up in our city. One thing, though, that I'll say that, it's not like we have any secret answer, but I've noticed one way that we seem to have addressed it. And this, I don't know that this was conscious. I just think it's the way it's occurred. Oklahoma City is a very pro-business environment, from regulation and laws. And I think what that's done is it's allowed businesses to grow and great wealth to be created and philanthropists to have money to donate. And we have relied heavily on nonprofits and philanthropy to fund our social services. And the reason I think that has worked out is that what I've come to believe is that if a person has fallen into that intersection of homelessness, mental illness, poverty, they almost certainly need an individual path forward. And government is not good at individual paths. Government's good at one policy that everybody has to agree on and follow. And a private sector, nonprofit, or a philanthropy-based organization is probably much better equipped at providing the individual path forward that's going to help that person become happier and more productive. And so we have not, as a city and really as a state, relied on government to take care of those social needs to the extent that a lot of bigger cities have. And I think our approach has been just as successful, if not more successful, in providing the private sector to come in and philanthropically help people with ideas and with people who are more likely to be successful than government.
Okay, you mentioned about how Oklahoma City has relatively light regulation and therefore has seen a lot of business growth. Houston, as you know, has really light regulation to the point where we don't have any zoning, at least zoning for use. I guess I'm wondering, in a regulation light situation, like in Oklahoma City, what kind of framework have you used? How have you kept it light and still effective? And are there any lessons for a no zoning city like Houston in that?
Well, we've been very development friendly. And so, urban sprawl, and it always seems like the best investment for new housing was on the perimeter. And so the city just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and new school districts either were created or grew. And we have
you said that inside the city limits there are at least portions of 24 different school districts?
That's right. 24 school districts serve kids that live inside the city limits of Oklahoma City. And so you have all these different perceptions about the education in this district or that district, and people move around to these different districts. And the impact of sprawl and the cost to local government and the lack of density and the cost of that, piled up. And so, we tried studies and I'd like to think over the last 10 years we finally got a better grasp of the cost. It wasn't necessarily on public safety. In other words, because our city limits were so big, we always had to provide police and fire for a too big of a geographic area. But it was the infrastructure. 8,000 lane miles of road, and trying to keep up with the ongoing maintenance of an ever larger infrastructure was weighing on our ability to fund, just services in general. And if people were disappointed in, the level of city government they were getting, it was largely because we were spending way too much of it to just try and keep up with the road network and the water system and everything else that takes place. Density is a big help to an efficient city government. And I guess Oklahoma City and Houston are two cities that have always lacked density. And when you start talking about public transit and start talking about the ability to run and operate yourself efficiently, we've struggled in those areas.
You mentioned MAPS, the
Metropolitan
area projects, and that has been a series of successful sales taxes. The question is, if the MAPS pay-as-you-go model has worked so well for you, why do you think other cities have been so slow to adopt a similar approach?
Well, here's one reason. In Oklahoma City, we've also had clean handoffs from one mayor to the next. In other words, Mayor Norick did not run for a fourth term, and his successor came in and fulfilled the initiatives that Mayor Norick had started, and then started his own initiatives along the way. And then I was elected mayor. Well, I made sure that I completed every initiative that my predecessor had started, and then added my own along the way. And so I think the citizenry have generally kind of appreciated that we don't stop and start every time we change elected leaders. And that's one of the reasons I think they've been more willing than most communities to continually invest when the leadership has asked them to. The city has not lost an election in 33 years. And I think that's, amongst the reasons that Oklahoma City has come so far, that's one of them. There's a lot of positive energy. People like the idea that leadership generally gets along. And we've had, kind of similar leadership styles through now over 30 years of mayor. And the young man that's the mayor now is my former chief of staff. And so, he was with me through all the trials and tribulations of much of my time in office. And, comes to office, with a lot of experience on issues, and was probably thinking to himself, if I'm ever in this position, how am I going to deal with this? A lot of people get elected mayor and they hadn't even thought about it 6 months ago. And we've been able to, to have a lot of experience in the mayor's role. And ultimately, I just think that citizens are more likely to support leadership if they see that it's been thoughtful and that it's been fair and there's been opportunity for people to offer an opinion, and then people get together and pull on the same rope.
So finally, because we're running out of time, I'll read this question for verbatim.
Okay.
What about you bringing a pragmatic, can-do, common-sense attitude to national politics?
Well,
it seems to be kind of a moment for mayors.
Well, I was just thinking Texas has a lot of electoral votes, too. Here's what I think. We have reached an era where elected leaders are pulling us apart, and we got to start electing people that are going to bring us back together. And I've got to think that this era of divisive politics is going to reach an end at some point, and then we're going to move back together. I can't tell you I can see the end of it right now. It doesn't seem to be getting better to me. But it saddens me to see elected people trying to divide people up. And I see it from both parties, and I see it continually. And, I'm about getting things done. I don't care who wins the argument. And it just seems like in legislatures and, and it could be this way in city councils. I can't say that was my experience. But I think I've just become more of an executive branch person. I'm trying to get things done. I'm trying to bring people together. I'm trying to get the best solution I can, even if it's not everything I want, and it generally won't be. But I think people elect mayors, governors, and presidents to get things done. They might elect a congressman or a senator to go out and fight for the cause and win the argument and make a point. But I don't think they elect mayors, governors, and presidents to stop things from happening. They want things to happen, good things to happen. I think you're starting to see an appreciation of that.
Okay. All right. Mick Cornett, thank you very much.